Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, we're going to talk about the kamikaze hit on USS Intrepid 77 years ago today, November 25th, 2001. For all of you watching this live, and from the United States, happy Thanksgiving to you. 77 years ago today, New Jersey, Intrepid, and the other capital ships and their escorts of Halsey's Third Fleet are operating together in the same task force off the Philippines. This fleet has just won the largest fleet battle in history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and they're still supporting the Allied invasion of the Philippines. By late 1943 and early 1944, the United States Navy has completely outpaced the Japanese Navy, both in new technological developments with systems like radar and the VT fuse, and in new ship construction. There will be 24 Essex-class fleet carriers constructed alone. All of them started during World War II, and many of them making it in before the end of the war. Intrepid, which we're talking about in this video, is the third of these completed Essex-class carriers, and so one of the earliest ones to get into the fight. The Essex-class are arguably the very best aircraft carriers of World War II, and I defend that point. I agree that they are the best. They don't enter the fight until late 43, and they enter at a time when Baltimore-class heavy cruisers, Cleveland-class light cruisers, Fletcher-class destroyers are all entering the fleet in huge numbers alongside Iowa-class battleships like New Jersey. And many of these ships are commissioned in 43 and make it into the Pacific War by early 1944. And so by mid to late 1944, during the invasion of the Philippines, the U.S. Navy has completely outpaced the Japanese Navy. Prior to mid-1943, the war in the Pacific is fairly even. The Japanese Navy is every bit the equal of the American Navy in technology, training, and number of vessels. And the battles there are hard fought. There's not many one-sided fights. Yet, a year later, the fights are entirely one-sided. The Japanese launch an overly complex plan to try and deceive the Americans as their last chance way of winning a major naval battle. And ultimately, they do not commit enough to succeed and won't operate together as a unit again. With all of these issues, Japan has to find some other way to try and continue to fight the war. The Japanese Navy has done its last breath strike as a combined unit and failed to dislodge the American invaders, despite their plan more or less succeeding. The same day, a month earlier, in October of 44, that the Battle of Samar is fought, Japan unveils their new weapon, a contingency plan for life after the combined fleet. With the combined fleet about to fail its mission, presumably going to lose ships and not having the oil to sortie again as a combined unit, the Japanese turn to the kamikaze, or divine wind, as their backup plan. The Japanese aircraft carriers that participate in the Battle of Leyte Gulf do not have enough trained pilots on board to actually be a threat. They act solely as a force in being to try and lure the American Navy away. However, Japan has trained some young pilots. I guess I can use the word pilot. They are trained to fly to a certain extent, but they don't have the same high level of training as Japanese pilots from earlier in the war or as their American counterparts. So rather than be trained on complex torpedo or dive bombing runs, they're trained to crash their aircraft into American warships, like early guided missiles. That way, their aircraft, the flammable fuel on board, and the ordnance they're carrying all have a chance of penetrating the American ships and detonating. The kamikaze attacks are a complete surprise to the Americans, and it takes a while for them to find a counter to it. With the aircraft continuing on their attack runs even after they're hit, American ships are damaged even though they thought they had shot down the Japanese planes, and they find that their guns are not effective enough to engage them. Plus, with kamikaze attacks coming in piecemeal, either by design or because the raw pilots can't fly in formation, the American Combat Air Patrol, though extremely sophisticated and guided by radar and air traffic controllers, has difficulty engaging all of the incoming kamikazes. From when the kamikaze attacks began in October, for the next 6 months, the U.S. Navy will struggle to find a solution, and countless ships, including USS Intrepid, will be damaged by kamikaze attacks. The kamikazes tend to focus on the picket ships, which tend to be destroyers, and the aircraft carriers. Most battleships are not affected by kamikaze attacks, and New Jersey herself is never hit. However, her sister ship Missouri is. We've got another video where I talked with Missouri's former curator, Megan Rathbun, about kamikazes and the hit that Missouri took. That's linked down in the description, so make sure you watch that. It's also important to note here that Japanese pilots earlier in the war, much like the pilots from other countries, often, when their plane was damaged during an attack run, continued their attack and even crashed their damaged aircraft into enemy ships. These are not true kamikaze attacks, and this style of crashing a damaged aircraft into the target is not unique to the Japanese. The true kamikaze attacks don't start until October of '44. So, in November of '44, just 1 month later, the U.S. is very much still scrambling to deal with this threat. Their anti-aircraft weapons and combat air patrols are proving to not be as effective as planned. In fact, American morale is taking a huge hit because there's no Western conception for this sort of mass-scale suicide attack. Sailors can't comprehend what's happening, and they don't have a good defense against it. All hours of the day and night, kamikazes could come in and crash into your ship without warning, and no matter how many times you hit that aircraft, unless you can completely destroy it, it still has a chance of hitting you. On November 25th, Intrepid is hit by 2 kamikazes within about an hour of each other. I often comment that Intrepid is an unlucky ship. I don't think she was in a battle that she didn't get damaged. However, she's always able to recover from the damage and continue to operate. She never takes the severe hits that some of the ships that are sunk, or ships like Franklin and Bunker Hill, her sister ships, take. So despite Intrepid being hit many times, the November 25th action is possibly one of the most famous because both hits are recorded on camera. The first hit is seen in a series of pictures taken on board Battleship New Jersey. We tried to find where that picture was taken and possibly even recreate it. However, New Jersey has been changed so much that what you see is nothing like the picture. The amidships, phalanx, and missile batteries cover the former 40mm gun tubs around the second funnel that you see in the picture, and we're not quite sure where in the forward part of the superstructure the picture is taken from. It could have even potentially been taken from one of the Mark 51 directors for the 40mm guns, or it might have been just forward of that in the forward superstructure. And that's important to note. Both Intrepid and New Jersey have changed significantly during their later careers. In 1944, each ship was about a year old. And since then, the places where the hits were made and where the picture was taken have changed so significantly, as have the rest of the ships, that you can't really recreate that. The 2 hits on Intrepid represent 2 separate kamikaze tactics. The first one, the one pictured from New Jersey, features an aircraft diving down into the ship. Oftentimes, aircraft will dive out of the sun to obscure the view of them. And at this point, American gunnery directors weren't quite good enough to account for that. Later on, radar directors will make the visibility of the target less of a issue and give you the ability to blind fire much better. But coming out of the sun, it's very hard to see, especially with the optically aimed Mark 51 directors and 20mm guns. So this aircraft is able to crash into the flight deck of Intrepid, which causes a fire, the burning aviation fuel, and interrupts flight operations. There's a hole in the deck now. However, American carriers intentionally have unarmored wooden flight decks so that they can be relatively rapidly repaired. And so damage control parties immediately start to respond to the fires and repair the damage so they can resume flight operations. The ship's combat capabilities have not been significantly threatened. Unfortunately, a second kamikaze comes in, and this one follows the other strategy that kamikazes often employ. While diving out of the sun is great because it means that even if the aircraft is shot to pieces, it's still going to crash into its target below it. This other kamikaze uses a different way to go undetected by flying in closer to wave top height. This attack, the entire attack, was caught on color film. And I'm not quite sure which ship this footage was taken from, but it's another one of the ships in the task force. And you can see the plane flying barely over an Alaska-class cruiser. I think it's Alaska herself. I'm not sure Guam is in service yet. And take repeated hits. You can see all the flak in the sky during this footage. The aircraft takes repeated hits and bursts in the flame, and still, because of its momentum, is able to crash into the flight deck of Intrepid. And again, you see a rolling fire of the gasoline from this aircraft. And unfortunately, because there are a number of damage control men on deck fighting the previous fire, Intrepid suffers a large number of casualties from this hit. So again, happy Thanksgiving. This year, I'm thankful that Battleship New Jersey, the aircraft carrier Intrepid, and other ships from 3rd Fleet were saved as museums for us to visit today. Which 3rd Fleet museum ship is your favorite? Let us know in the comments section down below. In the description below, we've linked a link to the order of battle for the U.S. Navy during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. There's a link in the description below if you would like to donate and support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks for watching.